As if the last year of school before college wasn't stressful enough, my dad got himself fired and we had to move to a new city so he could find a new job. It wouldn't have been so bad, except Dad was a teacher at my school, so everyone knew what he'd done. It was one of the worst things to happen to us since Mom died when I was 12, but this time it was all Dad's fault. You see, he was having an affair with the principal's wife, and someone in my grade filmed them and shared it across social media. I could have stayed at this school and finished my exams, but let's be honest, I'd never live it down. I lasted about 3 days before I went to the principal and told him I was leaving. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "You should be ashamed of your dad. Get out of my school." When I was emptying out my locker, one guy came up to me and said that me and my dad were a disgrace, and I shouldn't show my face in this town again. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. So Dad and I packed up and moved, leaving our old life behind. I was miserable at first. The video was still viral, and I even thought about asking Dad if I could change my surname to Mom's old name, just so I wouldn't have to be associated with it all. Dad couldn't find a job anywhere. Everyone recognized him from the video, and some newspapers had written about it too. It was a nightmare. I knew I'd have to start at a new school so I could sit my final exams, so I decided to try and disguise myself. I cut my long hair into a pixie cut and bleached it blonde. Then I got my nose pierced. On the first day, Dad offered to drive me, but I told him I'd walk, just in case anyone recognized him. I knew I was being mean to him, but I didn't care. He'd ruined my reputation, and I wasn't about to let him do it again. As I was walking to school, I wasn't paying attention, and I bumped into a young guy. "Hey, watch it," he said. "I'm blind." I apologized, then looked back at him. Wow, I'd never have known he was blind. And then I got an idea. I reached into my bag and put on my sunglasses, and then when I got closer to this school, I held onto the wall and walked alongside it slowly. I could see people looking at me, but I didn't care. A few people started whispering, and I let go of the wall. What was I even doing? But then a girl came up to me and introduced herself as Elsie and took me by the arm and offered to help me walk to class. She said her brother was blind too, so she knew how difficult it could be sometimes. Well, too late now. I'd started this, so I just have to play along. I mean, how hard could it be? I told her I was new around here and this was my first day. She seemed so excited. She started describing things to me, like where the girls' bathroom was, and then she took me to register, and I was so sure the principal would know I was lying. But it seemed this school took disability seriously. For the first time in ages, I felt like people actually cared about me. Elsie was assigned as my guide, and that first morning passed in a blur. When she introduced me to her boyfriend at lunch, I had to stop myself from staring at him. He was such a babe. But then I realized I could stare all I wanted because he obviously thought I couldn't see him. And when Elsie had her back turned, I could see him checking me out, looking me up and down. And from the way his mouth was hanging open, it was clear he thought I looked good. It was like a whole new world had opened up. As soon as people found out I was blind, they did all kinds of things in front of me. One guy was picking his nose, and then when we went to the bathroom, Elsie didn't even close the door. It was pretty awkward, but what could I do? Surely someone would catch me out. And yup, sure enough, in the afternoon, things went downhill. Elsie dropped me off at the classroom for people with special needs, and then she just left me there. I looked around me and realized people there seriously had proper disabilities and learning difficulties. I wanted to scream that I was a fraud and run out, but the teacher came over to me and gave me a hug, and I was reminded why I was doing this. Anything to avoid being the girl whose dad got fired because of an affair. But then she put a book in front of me, and I realized it was Braille, and my heart almost stopped. How was I supposed to know what this book was about? I had no clue how to read it. I had to get out of there. I told her I wasn't feeling very well, and then I reached out to grab onto the chair in front of me so I could feel my way out of the classroom. But I didn't even realize how hard I'd pulled it, or the fact there was someone sitting in it. And the next moment, the chair was falling on top of me, and then a girl fell onto the floor. I just lay there trying not to cry. How had I not seen her sitting there? This whole faking being blind thing was starting to mess with me. Then it got worse. She landed on her arm and broke it. She was actually blind, which made me feel so bad. And no one was even angry with me because they all assumed I couldn't see. The teacher ordered an ambulance for the blind girl and offered to call my parents to pick me up. And I panicked and said my dad was sick and my mom had passed away years ago. The teacher felt so bad for me and said I could rest in her office until the end of the day, and then she'd drive me home. I sat in the teacher's office and waited, and then eventually I decided to leave without her noticing. I left a note thanking her for looking after me. I wrote it with my left hand, of course, so it would look realistic, and then I snuck out. Everyone was in class, so I just walked out of there like normal and headed home. When I got home, Dad was in a good mood. He'd got a job interview and he had a date that night. I just ignored him and went to my room. What a crazy first day! The next day, Elsie was waiting for me at the gate, and I had to pretend I didn't see her and walk straight past her, but she grabbed my hand and helped me to class again. Then my teacher was there to welcome me, and she said she had some exciting news, that seeing as I was 18 and blind, and my dad was sick, I could claim some benefits to help me out. I couldn't believe it! Jackpot! Maybe being blind wasn't so bad after all. That morning I had gym class, which I wasn't expecting. I thought another perk of being blind would be that I got to skip sports and stuff. But no, it was so humiliating. It was a swimming class. The gym teacher gave me a swimsuit and I put it on backwards, thinking that would be more realistic. But our special needs department teacher rolled her eyes at me and said that by now surely I knew how to dress myself. She'd been so nice to me up until now. I didn't get it. I kept watching her and she was constantly looking at her phone. The rest of the day dragged by. Faking being blind was hard work. After school, I decided to go check out the mall. I wore my sunglasses in case anyone from school saw me. Anyway, the mall was pretty lame, so I bought a milkshake and decided to leave. Suddenly, I saw Elsie and her boyfriend, and I panicked. I was playing on my phone, and I was like, that's it, my act is up. They were kissing, so I walked by quickly, hoping they wouldn't see me. And then I realized something. It wasn't Elsie he was kissing. I looked right at him, and he froze and opened his mouth to say something. Then I heard him whisper under his breath, "Never mind, she's blind. Phew." Except I wasn't blind, mister, and you have officially been caught in the act. I walked back around, hid behind the fountain, and quickly snapped a pic of them kissing. Elsie deserved better. I looked her up on Instagram and sent her a private message with the photo. She replied straight away saying, "Who is this? Why are you trying to ruin my relationship?" And then it clicked. My Instagram handle wasn't my name, and my pic looked nothing like me. Oh yeah, and I was blind. Obviously she didn't know it was me. Well, at least she now knew that her boyfriend was a lying, cheating. Over the next few days, Elsie didn't come to school, and I regretted sending her that photo. If she found out it had been me who sent it, I'd probably have lost my only friend. I could see her boyfriend looking at me in a horrible way, but I just kept my head down. She must have told him someone had seen him that day. Was he on to me? He definitely was, because on Friday afternoon, I saw him going into my locker and taking my phone. It took all my strength not to jump out at him and stop him, but it was too late. He had taken it. I hurried home wondering what I could do. He'd see all the photos and figure out I'd been faking it. I could report my phone missing, but I had no proof that it was him that had done it. I couldn't exactly say I'd seen him. I just wanted to get home to try and figure out what I'd do next. Except that was not what happened. My dad had invited his date over, and as soon as I walked through the door, he told me to get changed and come join him in the kitchen. Great, just what I needed. I was chopping carrots when she arrived. I turned around as my dad introduced her. "Allison, sweetie, come meet my new girlfriend, Susan." I literally just missed my foot. I dropped the knife right out of my hand and stared in shock. "Oh no, Allison, are you okay? Wow, what a coincidence. You shouldn't be using sharp knives. Come on, Kevin, surely you know better than that," she said. "Hang on, you two know each other?" my dad said. "Why, yes, of course. I'm Allison's teacher. Why didn't you mention your daughter was blind? I had no idea you were her father. In fact, she told me her father was sick." I stood there, my skin burning with shame. I had to run. This was my absolute worst nightmare. "Allison!" my dad screamed, and that was how I got caught. I'd faked being blind because I just wanted people to like me and not associate me with my dad's mistakes. and now I'd gone and messed up everything, including my dad's new relationship. Susan, my teacher, was so upset with me and said I was a huge disappointment and that she didn't want to be with a man who'd raised a daughter like me. I guess I was just as bad as my dad, like father, like daughter. I wish I could say it all blew over after that and that I went back to school the following Monday and started afresh. Nope, life doesn't work like that. I was expelled, of course, and that Monday after school, there was a knock at the door. Elsie was standing there and I held my breath, assuming she was about to go crazy at me. But instead, she just handed me my phone. She said she'd been angry to find out I'd been lying about being blind, especially as her brother was blind, and it wasn't okay to joke about this kind of thing. But then she said I'd saved her from dating a cheater, and she was so grateful. I was shocked. That was not how I expected her to react. She said she'd broken up with her boyfriend and that he'd been suspended for stealing. "So, you still want to be my friend?" I asked her. And she did! I couldn't believe it. Sure, I could have saved myself a whole lot of trouble if I hadn't faked being blind, but then would I have discovered that Elsie's ex was bad news? And would Elsie have befriended me in the first place? There were just two small problems. I had to finish school, and I had to find a way to help my dad. He was so depressed about Susan breaking up with him. I plucked up the courage and called Susan and asked if she would meet me so we could chat. She agreed, and when we met, I told her I'd really messed up, but I'd only done it because of what had happened at my last school. I told her my dad had made some stupid choices in the past, and I had too, but he really liked her and deserved a second chance. I said I'd do anything to make it up to her, and begged her to ask the school to let me come back. Well, not only did they let me come back and finish my last year, they even hired my dad. Him and Susan are together now, and Elsie is my best friend. We're even going to the same college, and I've actually been learning Braille for reals. Part of the deal of finishing school was that I volunteered to help the kids with learning difficulties. I mean, it's the least I could do, right? I won't ever fake anything again. And guess what? People actually forget stuff. My dad's affair at my old school is old news now, and so is my whole faking being blind thing. Here's to a more honest future.
Hello, my name is Becca. Even though I'm still young, I went through something horrible most people never go through. I was jailed. I was sent away to a juvenile detention center. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for the things that I have done, but I want to share the traumatic experience I had at such a young age. Let's just say that no teenager should ever have to go through that. My story started when I began taking driving lessons. I was really enjoying my lessons and was always excited for the next lesson to come. My boyfriend Dan was already driving, and he had a really fancy car that his parents had bought him as a gift. Dan was really nice. He drove me to every place you could think of in that car, and I always envied him for having a driving license, unlike me. Only if I knew that my love for that car was going to change my reality. One night, Dan and I were in his car around the neighborhood. I was telling him how much I was fascinated by his car. Dan then offered to let me drive it, but I laughed and said that I wish. But Dan was serious. He said that there was no one around, and just a driver on the block would do no harm. I refused at first, but Dan kept pushing me to do it, so I eventually agreed. And it was awesome. The car ran so smoothly, and I drove around the block like a pro. But it didn't stop there. I wanted more. I took us to another neighborhood, and I was having so much fun. I turned on the music to full volume and smiled and went a bit faster. I took a look at Dan. He was such a wonderful boyfriend, I thought. He looked back at me and smiled. When suddenly we heard a loud sound and I stopped the car immediately. Oh my God, I thought. I hit something. Dan and I got out quickly. We saw a man lying on the floor. He looked dead. Oh my God, what have I done? I was panicking. I can't even remember much of that night, but I remember that I hurried back into the car with Dan and drove off without thinking. Hours after, police officers were knocking at my door, and that was the night my life went downhill. Even though the man I hit didn't die, I was charged with driving without a license and a hit-and-run attempt. At that point, I had lost all contact with Dan. A couple of months after my 16th birthday, I was sentenced to a year in juvie. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. I remember them putting me into a bus with a bunch of girls, some older than me, some much younger. It all seemed surreal to me as I stared out of the window. When I first entered the building, I noticed the number of guards standing around. It was unnerving to see them standing with a look on their face like they dared you to step out of line. The line I was in inched closer and closer towards the front until my name was called. I always hated going to the doctor, but this situation was different. They sat me down in a chair and asked question after question, each one more personal than the last. This was done while sitting next to a wide open door, a guard right outside, the line for the next girl not too far away, and other inmates and staff members walking past. To say that I felt exposed was an understatement. All the details of my life were aired out in front of strangers. After the seemingly unending questions, I was given a full examination. I thought the full-body pat-down by the man at the front was bad, but this was more touch, twist, and pull than I was comfortable with. The woman conducting the exam would keep saying, "Hold still," even though she was the one moving me, twisting my body into even more awkward positions, which would cause me to lose my balance. This earned me another stern look and a hard grasp of the shoulders. I was so happy when it was done, thinking that it couldn't get any worse. Then I met my roommate. She was a tall girl who must have been my age or a year older. When I entered, she gave me a look filled with caution and anger. The guard left, and she started to speak. She pointed her finger around the room. "This is my space, and it's been my space for years." Then she pointed to a small corner near the bed. "You can settle for that space over there." Her voice was absolute. She didn't wait for me to answer. She turned her back. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I sat there thinking about what I had gotten myself into and how the time would pass in this miserable place. The time I spent outside of my room was a nightmare. I was always the quiet type. I would rather spend my time alone than in a group. I wish I would have known that in juvie, it was the same as painting a target on your back. I got teased a lot. My things were thrown onto the floor, I was pushed from behind, tripped, punched, and even kicked. The treatment wasn't anything I wasn't used to, so I endured for a while until I had enough. I fought back and immediately got in trouble. The guards didn't help the inmates. Apparently that wasn't their job. Most of the time they would turn a blind eye until it escalated from a scuffle to a full-out brawl. They seemed to follow a motto: if we don't need to be involved, we won't. If we do need to get involved, you better hope you're not the reason. That's why most fights got resolved between the inmates. When the guards came to pull us apart, they pushed and pulled, then hit us until we complied. It felt worse than the actual fight. One time, I got in trouble with one of the inmates. She was big and strong, and she started attacking me because I didn't want to give her my pillow and blanket. However, things escalated quickly, and I found myself getting into a physical fight with her. She was terrifying, and she was attacking me without even making a notable effort. After a few minutes, something happened that made her go away. She went away. Finally, I thought, but that was when I felt a strong hand on my shoulder, and when I looked behind me, it was another scary inmate. She smiled at me and said, "No worries, sugar, I got you." I told her thanks and was about to walk away, but that's when I felt her pulling my hand aggressively. "What do you want?" I asked her. She said, "I just did you a favor, baby girl. Aren't you planning to return it back?" As she said these words, she started touching me in an uncomfortable way. She had her hands all over my body as if she owned me, and the look in her eyes made me shiver. At some point, I managed to escape her grope and go to my cell. A year after, I was released back into the world. I was 17 years old and close to being free to live my life. It was supposed to be a relief, but I couldn't get my time in there out of my head. Every person I walked past on the street, I saw as an enemy. This only got worse when I was sent back for my last year of school. When people tried to talk to me, I blew them off and walked away. When it was time for lunch, I protected my meal like it was my last, waiting for someone to come and knock it onto the floor. And when people got too close or bumped me, I took it as a threat and immediately became hostile, pushing them away. This was never who I was before. Yes, I was a loner with antisocial tendencies, but never violent for no reason. I didn't like living in fear, not knowing when the next attack or insult would come. I didn't know who to turn to, thinking that everyone wanted something from me that I didn't have or wasn't willing to give. I was broken. When my probation officer learned of my school habits, he suggested counseling. I thought it was embarrassing and unnecessary, but it ended up saving my life. After such a hard road, it was good to get those emotions out in the open and to feel truly free of that.